Welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast, the show that invites you to take a seat around the community fire and listen to stories that inspire. I'm your host, Kathy Robinson, author, coach, and founder of Athena Wellness, a company that's dedicated to supporting you on your journey to live more wholeheartedly. Hello, and welcome to episode 43. Thank you so much for joining me. Think of a time when you felt you couldn't fully be yourself. Perhaps you were at work or with a particular family member. Maybe you stopped doing the things that brought you alive slowly over time. Or there was an illness or trauma that changed you in some way. Today's guest has found a unique way to help women reclaim their power. Photographer Don Hajicek has created a unique, transformative experience of being seen through the lens of his camera. And through this process, not only do his clients experience healing and wholeness, he too experiences positive change and becomes, in his words, a better ally and a better man. He has spoken with thousands of women at global retreats and has worked one-on-one with more than 700 women in the U.S., Europe, and Australia. And as you'll soon hear, Don is thoughtful and gentle as he shares insights and stories of profound change and growth. We cover a range of topics, including how Don discovered the healing properties of photography, why we hide parts of ourselves and its impact, how a being seen photo session unfolds, and what happens when the hidden is allowed to be expressed. We end this episode with our Dose of Inspiration segment, where Don shares some of the things that are lighting him up these days. And as always, I'll put links to those items and Don's website, Tribe of Diamonds, in the show notes. And now on to the show. I hope you enjoy the conversation. So Don, welcome to the Athena Wellness Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You have had quite an interesting professional journey. Could you share a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I work with trauma survivors, female trauma survivors for the most part. And it's really women who are struggling with this push-pull dynamic between really being seen and, hiding either some part of themselves or sometimes literally all of themselves if they're really deep in hiding. And, I used to introduce myself as a photographer, but I found that when I introduced myself as a photographer when I was around people who had been my clients in the past, they always kind of slap me on the shoulder and go, tell them what you really do. So, photography really is my modality, which is not how I went into this work. Photography is a way I've found that brings up people's stuff in a very immediate way because they're being witnessed in a way where they feel like it's this moment that's frozen in time and it's going to reveal everything about them to the world around them. And so it creates this real tension. And so it's knowing how to get people past that tension. What I found is it doesn't just serve them in their photo session to find ways around that tension, that it serves them through really the rest of all the aspects of their life. And so that's kind of how that all played out.
I love this idea as photographer, as healer. But you hinted that this was something that you discovered, the healing properties of photography. So can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah. So I didn't used to work with people. I used to only be landscape photography on the side from my regular job, which was art direction, things like that, design, telling other photographers what I wanted them to shoot, even though photography was the thing that I wanted to do. A lot of us keep ourselves kind of on the periphery of what we really want to be doing. And I had an opportunity to switch over to photographing people. And that was actually really triggering for me because I'm an introvert. And I wasn't sure that was something that I really wanted to undertake. But there was a compelling project that I was becoming involved with. And as I started photographing people, someone came to me through a friend that I had photographed, and there was a lot of word of mouth going around. And she hired me to do a boudoir photo session for her. And if your listeners don't know what this is a form of photography in which my female clients express their sensual essence on camera. And the night before we were supposed to have our photo session, her name was Sarah, I got an email from her. And the subject line of the email was, "I need to ask you a question." And I opened the email and it said, "I'm a breast cancer survivor. I've had a double mastectomy and I don't feel like a woman anymore." And then she asked her question, which was, "Do you still want to do this?" And in that moment, I asked myself that question. Do you still want to do this? Can you do this? And the reason I asked myself that question is because just a few years prior to this, my mother had breast cancer and had a double mastectomy and did not survive. And so this brought up a lot of stuff for me to sift through as I considered this. But I realized, was my mother any less of a woman from the time of her double mastectomy until the time of her death? And that answer was no. And so I responded to Sarah and said, "Oh yeah, I'll see you tomorrow," in this sort of nonchalant way. But inside, I was like, how am I going to do this? Like, I wanted her to see that thing, that the terror, honestly, that I felt in that moment was not because of the situation itself. It was because she was asking me for something that I didn't know that I could do. She wasn't asking me for gorgeous photographs. She was asking me, can you put me in touch with a piece of myself that I feel like is gone? Right? Now, I didn't have all those words for it at the time. I wasn't a conscious man. This was like 16 years ago. Yeah, it's been 16 years. I wasn't like a fully conscious male in this world, implementing myself in ways that were, good for society and the planet. And that trepidation that I felt, I didn't have the words for it because of that, but I surrendered to this. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go and do this and see what happens. Right. So as I was photographing her, and I'm looking at, pictures on the back of the camera while we're working together, and I realized I was seeing her through a lens that I don't know that I had ever seen anyone through before. Because this was a lens that was just pure non-judgment and pure compassion, because I just wanted that outcome for her so badly. It was probably good that I didn't think I knew how to make it happen, because then I got out of my own way, right? Mm-hmm. But it was the very lens, that non-judgment and compassion, that allowed her to come forth in this way. And when she saw the photos, she saw herself as, sexy and all these different things. But she reflected to me, she saw herself as a whole woman. And now, at this point in the story, I would love to say, and then I realized what my purpose on the planet was, and I went off, but that's not how it worked. I did photography on the side for 7 more years, and I kept having those experiences, once or twice a year. I wasn't working with a lot of people, but people would reflect back to me something that I didn't expect. Culminating in, this was probably about 9 years ago, when I worked with a young woman who said the photo session allowed her to reclaim her body after years of abuse as a child. Mm. And I thought, there's a common thread between these stories. And I didn't even discover that common thread until I faced my own blind spot around being seen, which was a public speaking course that I undertook. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. And through the course of this class, I connected the dots, and I saw, I had recently decided to go full-time as a photographer. I was having success with the work, but, a hard time getting noticed and things. But I realized the common thread between the experiences that have meant the most to me in my life were that it was someone who had experienced trauma that sent them into hiding, who then found themselves in their light and allowing it to shine somehow through the process of working with me, through being witnessed by me. And so as soon as I put those pieces together, I got very busy, and started speaking on stages all over the place, and just off to the races with the work. There's such a need, as I've discovered, for this work.
I got chills multiple times in that backstory. But it reminds me, the writer in me, of the hero's journey. You can call it the healer's journey, maybe, of this idea of getting tapped on the shoulder and kind of refusing that.
Absolutely.
Multiple times, right? Until there's no refusing it anymore. And then realizing that the purpose is really about helping clients reclaim their wholeness. And in what you're describing, yours as well, which is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, as I kind of I didn't spend a lot of time trying to figure out, well, how is it that I can do this work? Because, I don't see a lot of it. And people are always like, this is such a unique experience. I've tried all these other things. And honestly, I wrote this book a few years ago, and through the course of writing that book, sort of confronted my own wounds. And, I've had people sort of that knew my story talking to me about wounded healer archetypes and things like that, which I didn't reject them, but I didn't fully embrace them in the way that I do now. But because in the course of writing that book and confronting all these things, I certainly realized that probably the piece that allows me to stand in these spaces and know that there's somewhere else to go from there is because I had to do that, right? And I've experienced some specific wounds that many of my clients share those same, the same wounds, not in a specific way, but in a general way.
Yeah. Yeah. And this idea of growth, I came across in preparing for this today, this concept of self-cultivation, meaning that you can only take your clients as far as your own level of development. And that as you've grown along the way, the work has grown with you, which is really beautiful.
Yeah.
Not having the words at the very beginning to being able to connect the dots and string these experiences together to say, oh, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Incredibly powerful.
I try to pay attention to those taps on the shoulder now. You never know what direction they're going to take me. Recognizing them as taps on the shoulder is the problem, right?
Yeah, we become much more attentive, right, as we go on in this journey.
Yeah.
It seems like we're all on some sort of journey to try to reclaim these parts of ourselves that we've either consciously or unconsciously hidden. Can you speak a little bit to this bifurcation? What is it that kind of puts people to not be able to be themselves? Like when we would choose to blend in, whether we're the way we talk, look, who we love, how we express ourselves, what are some of the things that kind of drives us underground?
Yeah. So I do want to put this little asterisk on all of this and say these are things that I'm learning from my clients. Like when I'm going in a session, I'm going in as a student as much as anything else. And what I've learned from, it's over 700 women now that I've worked with over the course of the last 7 years. It seems like, this is how I think about it. When someone comes into this world, the universe, God, whatever people want to call it, seems to like throw these dice up into the air that all land here, and they describe how this person is going to present in the world. There's a pair of dice that show the body they're born into, perhaps. There's these dice over here that show what their desires are coming into this world. And then there's some dice over here that represent where they are. We for convenience, we use words like masculine and feminine to describe things. So it describes where they land on this spectrum. And those three things, the body they're in, what their desires are in the world, and then where they are energetically on this imaginary line, could be anything. They could be anything. They could land in any sort of way. And what I want to do, this may sound lofty, but in this work is like, I want people to go back to like how those dice landed. If that's somewhere that they want to go, that seems to be what people are desiring. And to say that thing and that combination is perfect for what I'm supposed to do in this lifetime. And it's not so much that we choose to fight those things. And sometimes we do, but why? It's usually for self-preservation somehow. And I think there's a moment in everyone's life. There's always this first moment, and I think can happen in a lot of different places. I always kind of picture it like the playground. It's the first day of kindergarten, and the little kid walks into the school and he wants to play with his toy or whatever, and someone else is like, "You're to this," or "Don't be a baby," or whatever words you want to insert there. Don't be a, fill that in. That probably accounts, those moments account for more dysfunction in this world than I think people may realize. And it's not a coddling thing. It's just this rejection of who that person was supposed to be when they got here, right? And, parents don't want their child to be that child either. That is like, well, I want my kid to have friends. I don't want my kid to get beat up. I want my kid to, right? And so there's in this desire to help our children be loved and accepted and have lots of friends and be the class president and things, we kind of can fall into a space where we're kind of helping this hiding part along. And it becomes a lifetime of trying to fix things that are broken, quote unquote, instead of, in my experience, what I've witnessed with my clients is to remember the perfection that was there before. Because there was a moment when you already had everything that you needed to be everything that you wanted to be in this world. And it's like, if we can remember that and act from that place, how would the world change?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So remembering, that's a beautiful way of putting it. There's a lot here, and there's a lot of places that we can go, that I want to go. Can you talk a little bit about what a session is like? I would think that there would be not only some preparation for your client, but for you as well as you're moving into this space with your clients.
Yeah. So on my end, when I walk into a session, my main, not concern, but what I want to make sure is when I walk in there, I've got all the technical stuff taken care of. So the last thing I want to do once I'm in front of the client is to say, well, hang on a minute, I'm having a problem with my camera, or I have to play with this light for a while. Although sometimes I'll do that to let my clients settle in. Don't tell anybody. That's one of my secrets. Used to be. So that when I get to them, I can just be 1,000% present to them. Like my number one thing is when I get there, I have to pay attention. And if there's any preparation I do energetically, it's being in a place where I can receive whatever shows up, because I don't know what's going to happen. Even if we've done hours of preparation, which I do with my clients, I still don't know everything that may show up. And so even if I feel like we've prepared everything, I keep those things in mind, but I always leave room for what's the thing that's going to happen that I'm not expecting? What's the story that's, not what is, because I'm not anticipating it, but leaving room for hearing something that I didn't know was going to come up, which may be a story of trauma or change in goals or something like that. So I really go into it adding the student to all of that too, right? Because I know there's probably going to be something to learn, but I'm paying enough attention so I can file things away as I hear about them. Everyone's experience is different. So it's probably still on my end, more like the surrender that I found in that first session with Sarah, knowing that what is supposed to happen is going to happen as long as I stay out of the way of that thing happening. From their end, I don't have like a 5-step process or a 10-step process because every session is different. And for some people, it's a 1-step process. And for some people, it's a 99-step process. And it's whatever's required in those moments. I'll go there. But I'll have my clients start with, if they'd like to do it, this Diamond Facets playbook, I call it, to get a snapshot of how people think they're being seen in the world at that moment. And this changes all the time, of course, but gives us a place to start talking about things. That's my initial intention around designing it. What I found is that actually where the sweet spot of the workbook is when I find out that there's a word in there that has made this person angry. I'm divulging a lot of secrets today, but one of the things I found is that whatever word in this workbook, if there is a word that for some reason makes someone think, well, why is that word in the workbook? And I'll tell you a couple of the words that might surprise you. The most common triggers for people are the words nurturing and playful. Interesting, right?
Yeah, very interesting. Not where I would
Yeah,
have gone. Yeah.
I know. I expected other words that, like,
Wow.
there's the word sensuality in the workbook and things like that. Those don't tend to trigger people as much as, and we have fascinating conversations around, like, oh, well, why is it that, you know, if you want to tell me, like, what's your definition of this word? And then I'll hear some fascinating things. And usually it's attached to a story somewhere in their past. But when those words, every single time that there's been a word like that that has triggered someone, it has ended up being part of our theme, part of what they've chosen as their theme for that day. So someone who was angry about the word playful always ends up deciding, I want to be able to show my playful side.
Mm.
You know, I want to bring that into this. I want to be reminded what that looks like, because I stopped being playful when this happened in my past, which is why that word makes me angry, as it turns out. So those kinds of preparations will go on, as well as logistical things. So I'm finding out where they're most comfortable. For some people, they really want to be in a studio because they feel like it's kind of sealed off from the real world. Other people are like, studio's the last place I want to go. I want to be out in nature because then I feel safe. So since them knowing that they're safe is my number one thing, I always want to start with where is going to help them feel the most at ease. The place where this work wouldn't work is if that person didn't trust me. It's okay if they walk in not trusting me, because most of the time they do. But if we can't get to the point where they do trust me, I know that it's probably not going to work. And, after 700 plus people, I can say that we always get there.
Mm-hmm. Listening to you talk, it reminds me of the story of the Golden Buddha. In a monastery in Thailand, there was a 10-foot, 5-ton gold Buddha that was discovered in plain sight. It was covered in plaster and paint and colored glass back in the 18th century. There was an invasion, and there was fear that the Burmese army was going to take this precious Buddha, so they covered it. And unfortunately, all the monks were murdered, but the Buddha statue was left untouched. In the 1950s, the monks that were still living there decided to move the monastery. And as they started to move this Buddha, one of the monks saw that there was a big crack and noticed this gold light emanating.
Mm.
And they found that what they actually had sitting there was a $250 million solid gold Buddha.
Wow.
And so I think about all of these layers that you're trying to get through: the conditioning, the expectations, the trauma, illness, external influences, and how these layers add up, and that you're looking for these cracks.
Yeah.
And when you see that light coming through, like that is almost like an entry point for the work or for the session,
right?
Which I think is incredibly beautiful. So my question in all of this is that as this session progresses, I'm guessing that at some point there's a breakthrough where you can start to see that essence emerging. Is that kind of what happens? Is that how?
Yeah. So very early on, when I started doing this work, before I really knew, after I started doing the speeches and doing all the travel and things, but as I was learning what this work was really providing for people, I remember there was a session. I don't remember the specific session, but my client was smiling and smiling and smiling, and I thought, she's not having fun right now. This is not her, but she's still smiling because she feels like she has to smile, because that's what you're quote unquote supposed to do in a photo session, right? And so I just asked her, I said, you know what? I really want to take a few photographs of you where you're not smiling. I just want to see, I really want to see you at rest and feeling like you're just here and everything's okay. And she was very resistant to that idea. She did not really want to do that. But she's like, yeah, I'll try it for a minute. So she stopped smiling and she was just being present to the camera. And I only snapped a couple of photographs before she started crying. And, I asked if everything was okay. And she's like, yeah, this actually feels really, really good to not have to smile.
Mm.
She's like, I've never given myself permission to be in the presence of another person and not have to have this smile plastered on my face that says everything's okay. And so from there, I started then saying that in a lot of sessions. So early on in the session, I would say, just for a few minutes, see, everybody's going to know all my secrets by the end of this podcast. Just for the next 30 seconds, don't smile. And I've heard everything from, I didn't hire you to take pictures of me not smiling, like that. And what was fascinating was every time I asked a woman not to smile during the photo session, I will say 9 out of 10 times, it was very quickly followed by tears. Mm-hmm. Because that's part of this, I found to be this overall conditioning that I was not really even conscious of at the time, but I'm very conscious of now, the ways that at least the women that I work with feel like they have to have this smile on all the time. Now, I will say that because I meet a great deal of my clients at retreats and conferences that are, about recovery or things like that, healing. That may be why it's 9 out of 10, but I suspect that percentage is pretty darn high among the general population as well. And knowing that there's this moment that they can be witnessed without having that darn smile on their face, that they don't want to be smiling in that moment, is probably the first crack that I'll see. Mm-hmm. Now, I consider that initial smile as a piece of armor. So I'm identifying armor throughout the session. That could be anything. It could be talking. There are clients that don't say much until the camera actually comes up here. And as soon as I bring the camera up, they're like, my cousin's a photographer. He uses Sony cameras. What kind of camera are you using? And it's just identifying those things that they're putting between us so that I cannot see them. And they know, especially if they've heard me speak at an event, they know this guy is going to see me, right? So it becomes that much more, obviously they've hired me, so they want to be seen. I always have that in the back of my mind. I'm like, they want, this is why they're here. And it just manifests in lots of different ways. But as soon as that last piece of armor is sort of, gently, you can pick this back up when the session's over if you'd like. For now, let's just set it off to the side here. That's when I start to see this person, and it's the power, it's the softness. I mean, as many of my clients that come to me and say, I'm out of touch with the powerful part of myself, but I know it's in there. I really want to see it again. It's when that armor is removed and they start allowing themselves to feel it. There's a certain part of this that is a very meditative exercise. Really dropping in and letting that thing that exists, if you embody it, you will see it. Like, you will see it. But as many of them as I work with, there's just as many, or possibly even more, women that come to me and say, I want to see my soft side. Like, I'm not allowed to show that soft part because I'm supposed to be doing this X, Y, and Z, and I lost it, but I know it used to exist and it felt so good, And when they see that in themselves too, and how it naturally expresses in themselves, I'm not certainly telling them what their version of soft looks like. It's never about what I think it should look like, because I know it looks different with every person. So if they can start to allow it to present itself, and then I'm always showing pictures in the back of the camera so they can see like where we're going, and they're shocked. And the thing I always hear every single photo session is, I can't believe that's me. And there's no Photoshop, there's no tricky lighting, there's no nothing. There's just us and them remembering, right? They may not have allowed themselves to see that part in themselves, that actually knows that to be true. And I think that's part of where that blind spot thing comes from. I mean, here I was essentially asking women to be seen in these very profound and vulnerable ways when I wasn't willing to get up on a stage or be in front of a camera, right? There was a thing I wasn't doing that I was asking them to do. So I was out of integrity until I was willing to walk up on a stage and say, this has been my experience, or be on a podcast and talk about what I found out in the world there. I think when we get back in touch with those things, we may be tapping into a blind spot that's going to open up our whole worlds for us, the way being seen opened mine, and being soft maybe opened up someone else's, and being powerful opened up someone else's.
Mm-hmm. So there's not only transformation happening with your clients, but obviously it's happening to you as well. So how have you in all of these years changed, not only as a human, but as a man? You're working with, females day in, day out. How has that changed you?
I remember early on, I would cry at the end of every session, and I would think about my mother, and it was like for her at some level. And I just felt her. I just felt her there. Certainly, I felt her from the stage when I was, giving the speech, and where I tell the story of Sarah and I, and in some way the story of my mother and I. Gosh, I just felt her every single time, and still do. And I think the biggest part. So I'm going to tell you a story if I can.
Yeah, sure.
And one more asterisk on this. I don't share stories that my clients haven't told me I could share. Certainly not when they're attached to photos, right? So, but early on, actually, I think it may have been it was like after I did the first speech I ever did. I was speaking with this man who ran a veterans reintegration project in Denver. So he helped veterans, get off drugs and back into work, and things that were coming back from Afghanistan and these different places, and often ending up homeless. And he was asking me about what I was doing, because he said he had a recent influx of homeless female veterans that were trying to reintegrate into society. And many of them had experienced sexual trauma in the course of serving our nation. And we're now, having these difficulties, but there's this program they were going to be doing with, there's a wild horse therapy program in Boulder, Colorado. And he asked me if I would go there and photograph it. And so I agreed to do it. It's like all my favorite things coming together, right? I love working with women. Veterans issues are huge to me. And this was like female veterans, homeless female veterans. So I was getting ready to go there, and then heard back, and they said, well, this is actually a really sacred space, and we never allow men in this group. This is just for women. We have to keep this space very, very safe and very, very sacred. And I was like, okay, I totally appreciate that. But let me send you a recording of this first speech I ever did from the month before or something. And when they saw it, they were like, okay, we're going to let you in, but you have to keep your distance. Keep distance from the circle. And I was like, absolutely. So I get there. It's a beautiful day. There's this huge circle of women underneath this giant cottonwood tree in the middle of this big horse field, and the Flatiron Mountains are behind it. It's just gorgeous. And I'm taking pictures of the group from far away. And basically, the circle is it was the female veterans, as well as horse handlers and therapists and social workers and things like that. They had to go. They had a van that went around to all the different homeless shelters in Denver to pick up these female veterans and bring them to this thing. It's just a travesty the way this country treats their veterans and their women. And so as I was taking photographs, I was getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And eventually I could hear just some of the words that were some of the stories that were being talked about. No one was really aware that I was closer, but I was a little closer. And as I got close enough to hear a story, I heard specifically one woman recounting a harrowing tale of her sexual assaults at the hands of people that she was serving with, people that were her commanders. And I felt this moment of, I need to go away. And part of it was about, I'm too close. And part of it was about, I'm really uncomfortable right now as a man to know some of the things that were going on. So I turned around, I started to walk away, and I thought, walking away from this is something I can't do right now. And so I turned around, I put my camera down, I walked up close to the circle, and I sat down, and I was right across from her, and I just listened. I knew there was nothing I could do. Like the first knee-jerk thing was, there's this crying person, I want them to feel better, right? The second reaction was, well, there's nothing I can do, so I need to get out of here, right? So I sat, I listened, and I just wanted her to know that I was witnessing her, that I was just present to this story. Well, I didn't want her to know, but if she wanted to know, she would see me and know, right? So then we had a lunch break. And while we were on this lunch break, I was sitting off of this table separate from everyone, and I'm eating my little tuna sandwich or whatever. And that woman comes up and starts walking over, and I thought, I'm probably about to get in trouble for being too close. But she came over and she said, thank you. She said, thank you for not walking away. So she knew I was hearing her the first time. She saw me turn my back. And she said, thank you for not walking away. We need men to know these things, and we need everyone to know these things. But mostly we need men to listen to us, because that was part of her experience in whatever armed forces, branch that she was in, that she was not being heard about what happened, right? And so what I took away from that, and what was the beginning of me learning how to be a better man, better person in this world, is to know she didn't need me to fix it. She didn't want me to run away. What she really needed from me was to know that I was going to stay and I was going to listen. And that one lesson has probably served me more in every kind of relationship that I have than anything else. And I try to continue to learn. And especially in creating the space for my clients, that has to be the number one thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's an incredibly powerful story. And it made me think of all of the discourse that we're hearing right now, that I'm guessing, and this is a question for you as a man, is that what you want from the women in your life? Is it the same thing?
That's a good question. I've never thought about that before. Well, it certainly is something I desire. Like, I definitely want to be heard. I think everyone wants to be heard. Yeah, I'm going to say yes, that is. I would say a big part of what I want out of this world is to feel, especially in relationship, to feel like truly heard and witnessed. And for whoever hears and witnesses me with everything, like warts and all, is chooses to stay, right? In that moment, at the very least, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels like you're going very deep in this one area, but it's so applicable to where we are. I think, when I think about some of the social issues or the political issues or the economic issues, or fill in the blank on whatever that is, there's a lot of shouting and a lot of back turning and walking away, versus listening. And so I just feel like this is a wonderful model with much broader applicability.
Right. There's a lot of shouting going on these days, and a lot of hands over ears these days as well. I think there probably would be less shouting if we talked about the majority of things that we actually have in common with each other. And I've certainly found that through this work too, because I work with every kind of person from every kind of political beliefs or social cultural beliefs, and I travel all over the world doing this work. So I work with people from all over the world, and I found these people are concerned about the same things. They all want to have happy families. They're all hiding because something in their culture has made them wrong about something about who they are. And I mean everybody. I'm not just talking about the people that pop into mind when we feel that this person is not accepted in this culture, because there are plenty of people on the other side of the spectrum who also don't feel seen or heard. And when we're seeing and hearing each other, healing is like the only thing that can happen from that. I truly believe that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
You have mentioned that you work with a lot of repeat clients, and I wonder what this work does. Like, I'm sure you see some sort of an evolution from the first time you work with them to maybe the second, third, or I don't know how many times they may come back, but what is that like when you see this? Is it a result of this repressed energy that's been expressed? Or what is part of the transformation that you witness? What is that like?
So, well, as far as the energy that's expressed, I've seen lives change. And it's not because, well, Don took my picture. It's because they're owning all of themselves and they're letting those pieces come through. I did a retreat in DC a number of years ago that I presented at. I talked about different things each day, but there was, with the people at the retreat, they each got, as part of being a part of this retreat, a photo session with me. So it's not something that they, paid extra to have or whatever. So they didn't really choose it, That's the main point of this story, is that it's not something that they actually chose. Oh, I want to do this. Everyone that was in the retreat did end up working with me, but there was one woman that came to meet me for the session, and she said, I'm sorry. I feel like I'm wasting your time. I'm here, but I'm not going to do this. Like, we can have coffee. We can go get lunch if you want to, but I apologize for, you've got all your stuff here and everything, but I'm not going to have my photographs taken. I was like, oh, okay. Like, it's not something you have to do, but do you want to tell me why it is that you don't want to have your photographs taken? And I'm not going to say the list, but she gave me a list of 3 things that she hated about herself. And they were like, if anybody said those things about you, you would feel really bad, but she would never say those things to anyone else. Right. But she said them about herself. And I said, if you let me take your picture for 5 minutes, I promise I'll show you a photograph of you that'll be more beautiful than any photograph you've ever seen of yourself. And she said, my main fear is I don't want to be the one person this didn't work for. You said something in your speech about how this works for everybody, no matter what they've been through, and et cetera, et cetera. But I can't handle it. No, knowing these things about myself, I can't handle it that you're going to take these photos. I'm not going to see it. That's terrifying. And I said, 5 minutes. Let's go do this thing. So we went outside. I took her picture for 5 minutes. I showed her a photograph and she started crying. And because it was so beautiful.
I was going to say, did you know which way it was going?
I was like, that's so beautiful. Right. So by the end of the session, it was a 1-hour session. I think everyone got like 5 pictures with it. And she said, well, I get 5 pictures, but what do I need to do if I want more than 5? And I was like, can we go back to how this whole thing started? Right. And so, we laughed, et cetera. But the point of this is within a few months, now part of the story that she told me was that she had been alone for 25 years. She had been on her own for 25 years. Within 6 months, there was pictures on Facebook of her and her fiance. She's married now. She's been married for a few years. And a couple of months ago, she sent me this long letter about how she found the love of her life and all these things and all these photographs of her and her man out doing the world together, right? That came from getting rid of those 3 things that she hated about herself. And all it really took was for me to create a moment in which I knew she wasn't in the process of judging herself. Because what she doesn't like, and what all of us don't like, when we wake up in the morning, what I don't like, when I wake up in the morning and I shuffle over to the bathroom mirror and I flip the light on and I'm like, oh, here's this list of stuff I don't like about myself. And I truly believe when any of us wakes up in the morning and is looking in the mirror and we're getting more and more triggered by the things that we don't like about ourselves, what we're seeing that we don't like is this judgmental jerk looking back at us. So if I can, besides removing the armor, or in process of removing the armor, if I can get that judgmental person to, for a second, get out of my way so I can see this person as her friends see her every day. These photos aren't things that people see and go, I didn't know you could be that beautiful. They say, that's the you that I see whenever we get together for coffee on Tuesdays and we're talking about this funny thing that happened last week. That's the person that I see. The person who owns that face never sees that joyful, relaxed person that doesn't have their guard in. When they do see the guard, that's what they don't like. So as far as the way the energy expresses itself afterward, it can be anything. And this is why, on my homepage, you'll see of my website, there's like 3 different, I call them doorways. And one is women at a crossroads. So this is like, the kids, they're empty nesters, like the kids just left. So, or it's they just got a divorce. They're leaving their corporate job, starting their own thing, finding themselves. There's also it's reclaiming your sensuality as a doorway. And there's also entrepreneurs. So it's whatever doorway it comes in, it's the same processes. And whatever doorway it comes in, I know we're probably going to go through one or both of the other doors at some point, because all those things are the same thing. They're all the same thing. It's all about how can I show up? So I may have a client that comes through door number 1, 5 years later, they want to go through door number 2 or whatever, or it's all the things in the same day, like a long day of exploring, like, who is this goddess and what are the, where's the warrior and where's the mystic and where's the healer? If those things are real to that person, they want to see those things. Where's the mother? Where's the, any of the archetypes that or what I call archetypes anyway, may come in. The magic of this person, the nurturing aspects of this person, the messenger or healer, that this person is. So sometimes people want, more sessions over time so they can explore these different parts. And it opens up, the doors on my site go this way, but it opens up all the doors that go in the other direction for them. They're like, oh, what's possible if I check out this part of myself,
I love that part. You talked about witnessing, we've talked about healing, but there's also possibility. And that's what you're speaking to here, that over time, people see the interconnectivity of all these different elements. That's wholeness, right?
Yeah.
How things are coming together and they're presenting themselves in different ways in the world. And you're getting to witness that and document that journey for them, as they go on. It's incredibly heartwarming. And I love that you're doing this work out there in the world.
Thank you. I'm grateful every day because as much as this does for anyone else, it does all of that for me. I mean, I don't feel selfish saying so that, at the end of these sessions, there's a part of me. I mean, the way I talk about it sometimes is I feel like my clients, every time I work with something, it's like they take me apart into all these different pieces and then they rearrange me a little bit, hopefully a little bit better than I was before that session started. And slowly I'm becoming like more of the person through this work, more of the person that I'm meant to be in this world. I'm doing my own remembering. But I feel more like the person I probably was when I came into this earth. And I remember specific things about me that were rejected as a child or whatever. That I'm finding, oh my God, that's where the happiness in my life is coming from. Remembering those things that the other boys at school told me not to be or whatever. And saying, this is just how I am.
Mm-hmm.
And that it serves people when I come from that place is joyful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, certainly needed in this world. I want to wrap up with talking a little bit about how you keep yourself well.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do to keep yourself ready to go from a wellness perspective? How do you treat yourself right?
So, prior to COVID, I was traveling about 70,000 miles a year. And so I was going through airports a lot. And the way I kept myself from going crazy and becoming very unhealthy was walking, for sure. Walking. I love walking. I mean, I've walked around the mountains in India and I've walked, up and down the boardwalk in San Diego and just everywhere I go, I want to walk. I want to see the people that I run into and it keeps me healthy. Right. And I'm doing this, by the way, as an introvert. So I'm more observing people. I'm not like walking up to strangers and saying, hey, what's your story? I'm like, oh, that's an interesting person. I wonder who they are when their armor comes down and what ways they're going to change the world when it comes down, right? But walking is definitely my number one thing. It's been not as much of a thing for me in the time of COVID, which is interesting because I've had a lot more time to walk, but I've been spending it differently because of changed circumstances. So I have not been doing as much walking certainly in the last year, but that's definitely my preferred mode of taking care of myself. And more lately, I've been doing a lot more walks lately. So getting back into it.
It's good. That's one of my favorite practices too. So I share your introverted walking. It's nice for introverts to be able to kind of blend into the background and just get out there and move.
And the things you notice when you're walking, taking a long walk, it's just amazing.
Exactly. What have you read or listened to lately that you've enjoyed?
I've actually been listening to, I love audiobooks. Listening to a lot of David White lately. Oh my gosh, so amazing. What to Remember When Waking is an amazing, gorgeous, beautiful book. Consolations, all of his work is just, it's so beautiful. And I love learning something new through poetry. Mm-hmm. There's just something about that mode is just, I don't know. It may not be for everyone, but I love it.
Mm. I will put links to David's. I always, any way that I can promote David's work. So I will certainly put a link to his website in the show notes. Now that we're emerging, what new thing or experience are you looking forward to?
Yeah. So, well, it's not a new thing. The thing I'm looking most forward to is traveling again. I mean, I've got friends, literally everywhere now. My clients are all my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always got invitations to go to these crazy places. So just getting back out and going to these magical places with these magical people is something I'm really looking forward to that feels new after a year.
Mm-hmm.
As far as new experiences, really the entire experience of coming back into however this world shakes out is very, very, very exciting to me. I'm hopeful and convinced that it's going to be different because I haven't really spoken to anyone who says to me, I hope this goes back to precisely what it was before this all started.
Agreed.
And I'm hoping that a new thing that we emerge into and that I'm very excited about is that people start valuing themselves and that ends up being part of what changes the world that we're about to go back into.
Lovely, lovely. If you were able to take the perfect road trip, where would you go and what would you do?
Yeah. I would drive. Can it be a walking road trip?
You can do whatever you want. It's your trip.
I would be walking. I would be walking. I would love to walk every iconic road on each continent, something like the Pacific Crest Trail or Appalachian Trail or something in the States. And, there's the one in Spain. I can't remember what it's called to walk that one. And,
Camino.
yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'd love to walk around. I just watched the movie Tracks the other day. That was really nice about a woman that it's a true story that walked across Western Australia back in the 70s with her camels. That would be an amazing walk. I just love those stories where, because of course, reading the book Wild was what made me so attached to that idea. The stories of the journey of finding oneself by becoming completely separate.
Mm-hmm.
Is really amazing to me. So it would be a long walk on some crazy adventure and writing about it as I went along.
Would you bring your camera?
You ask the best question. I probably would.
Okay.
Even though, people that know me are upset sometimes because if I go to other functions, I do not bring my camera on purpose because I'm there to enjoy the function.
Not working.
Exactly. But I probably would. I probably would bring my camera.
What has you feeling inspired and optimistic these days?
It's probably the same answer as the emerging. It's this hopeful knowledge that we're going to come out into something that didn't exist before, and that we all have the self-awareness and the bravery really to go back as more of who we are, because I really think that's the key to this, the absolute key to this, including the value piece that I was talking about earlier, is that we don't go back into the world as exactly the person that we were before and expect someone else to change it. And I think if we go back into the world as the person that we remember us being, oh my gosh, it has a possibility of being a utopia at some level, What would be better than everyone running around being precisely the person that they were born to be? Mm. And how happy would everyone be on every side of the political spectrum if they could just be that person without apology,
It's an interesting reframe to see COVID as a giant camera taking a picture.
Yeah. Gosh, you're good. I love it.
It just hit me as you're talking. Awesome. It's just like, wow, I needed that reframe too.
Yeah.
Like, wow, we're all bearing witness in some way. And I think we all have that same hope of, as you said, I've been asking people as well. And it's like, no one wants to go back, but they're not really sure what's forward. So there's this strange liminal space that we all seem to be in. Yeah. Not sure how to move out of it, but wonderful.
Beautiful.
I can't thank you enough for your time. I'm sure our listeners are going to want to get in touch. What is the best way and how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so they could email us fine, photos@tribeofdiamonds.com. My website is obviously tribeofdiamonds.com. All my social media being Instagram, Facebook is Tribe of Diamonds. Yeah, I would say my site or email or Instagram are great.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Yeah.
And I'll put links in the show notes there. Don, I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I can't thank you enough for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really amazing.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I know there are many ways you can spend your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with me. Until our paths cross again, be kind to yourself and show your warrior spirit some love. If you know anyone who could benefit from today's episode, please pass it on. And many thanks for supporting the show by subscribing and leaving a review. It means a lot, and it helps others find their way to our circle. If you'd like to access the show notes, have a question you'd like addressed on a future episode, or would like a transcript of this episode, visit www.athenawellness.com/podcast. Until next time, be well.